Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AI Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our Quick Publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AI Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AI Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Hello and welcome to the Minefield podcast from Anfield Index Pro. I am your host, Alan O'Donoghue, and as always, I am joined by my wonderful sidekick, Mr. Andrew Vincent. Andrew, how are you doing today?
I'm good, but I think saying as always is like we're always on the pod together, but to say that our pod happens always or anything close to always, like I think is a total misrepresentation of how frequently we have these conversations at this point.
I believe that the reason we have these infrequent conversations is purely down to the fact that when we do talk, the amount of awesomeness that comes out is just too much for the world to be able to cope with if we were to do this more regularly. That's what I'm telling myself anyway.
And it must be like the Gestalt cycles conversation. Stop. There's so much awesomeness in the Gestalt episode that we had to pause everything for several months. And here we are. The awesomeness is faded enough that it's safe for the world that we return.
I'm just realising as well, this could well be the first time that some listeners have listened to the Minefield podcast and they've just heard us talking ourselves up. Isn't that fantastic? You know, pretentious pricks talking about themselves.
That's great. And you won't have to worry about it for another 3 months or 4 months or something like that. So soak it in, listeners. Enjoy it. I'm just...
Yeah, so we've only had like 2 people stay on, and that's okay. We're okay with that. So anyway, today, Andrew, what we wanted to kind of tap back into was the mentality monsters. But I want to frame it in the perspective of Liverpool in its current iteration in terms of the culture that we have and how mentally strong the team are showing they can be. And let's dip into some of our, what we call them, oppositional teams, and some of them are not close to us, but they may just be like, you know, our enemies of sorts in terms of what it looks like for them and their culture right now. But let's start with Liverpool. Okay, so for a lot of pundits back in January, the league was over. Man City were, I think, 10 points clear at the time. They had just won. I can't remember who they beat. And anyway, all the talk was, that's it. League is over. At the time, I remember thinking, every season, somebody says this around this time. And every season, usually people are proven wrong because it's not as clear-cut as it looks. And we had our good friend Bernardo Silva from Manchester City being interviewed after they drew at Crystal Palace, basically having his Kevin Keegan moment where he's like, they got to come to our place and they got to play us and that's not going to be easy for them. And we hear nothing like that from Klopp. We hear nothing like that from any of the interviews with any of the squad or the backroom staff that I've noticed anyway. Talk to me a bit about the culture that we've built, that opposition teams are talking about us so much and we are still maintaining this bubble of we don't talk about anybody else and we just get on with things.
Yeah, I think, you know, for one, like, it's one thing to say we're going to focus on one game at a time. It's another thing to really believe that. And I think like Klopp is so committed to that at like a very real way. I mean, there's the cliche version of that where everyone says it and no one does it, and then there's the real version of that. And I think that's something like this Liverpool group has managed to do really well and like put processes in place to like really keep that focus on exactly what's next and gotten good buy-in around that. And so I think that's where it comes from, is just like, you're not, when you're focused on what's right in front of you and you're focused on what's next, there's just not enough time where, like, the other stuff just fades in importance. What's important is what's next, and the other stuff isn't important, although like it can be distracting. It's not as important, so it fades into the background a bit.
Yeah, and I think more recently there's been obviously tons and tons of discussion and, headlines and everything written about Mo Salah and his contract situation, and fans are having like meltdowns, and there's massive conversations and discussions. But you listen to Klopp, and he's, what he's saying publicly is, I'm not worried, there's nothing to talk about. Everything's fine.
Yeah, well, I think like the more I've had a chance to work with some people in the professional side of sport, like the more I've recognized like there's a behind the curtain aspect to it that's like much more calm and normal, and like the fan pundit side of it is like a bit more narrative driven, and it like not even a bit more narrative driven, much more narrative driven and much more short term. Like, and like there's just a reality that, like, I think on the fan side and the pundit side, every event either belongs to a narrative or becomes a story. And like kind of on the other side of that curtain, sometimes things just happen or are going on, or they're going slowly, or aren't nearly as exciting as they're sort of made out to be on like the media side of things, because that's how you sell stories, or just like aren't as terrifying as they are for fans. And so like, part of that is there's just a day-to-day, like, if we're fans, right, and we're like, hey, what's next for us? We're like, oh, it's the next game on the weekend. But for the players, it's like, oh, well, it's like next is coming to training tomorrow and seeing people and doing this, and then training again, and then training again, and then going on international break, and then coming back. And so, like there's more of an actual thing that they can be focused on, too, which I think, there's kind of a grind just in reality to being a player and being on the inside of that, where like it's hard work and you're having to put in that hard work, and that hard work's not all as exciting as the games. And that's not to say like it's not an exciting life being a professional sports person. It's just like I think it takes the edge off of some of the things like this contract dispute, we'll call it a dispute or whatever, like these contract rumors, like, that this is a mundane part of their job to some extent, is like, well, people get contracts all the time, and there's always conversations and stuff between agents. They can be more calm about it, especially when you're someone like Klopp, because he's been around for a long time now. Like, he comes across as a young man, except like, he's been doing this for a really long time now. And so like he can be calm about this in a way where it's hard for fans to be calm about it, because like he sees it in a totally different way. So I think that's part of it too, is like, the inside reality of focusing on the day-to-day is easier when you have a day-to-day to focus on. Whereas for us, it's like, if I was going to focus on Liverpool today, what would I do? I'd probably look at the table and I'd count how many games we have left, and now I'm already not focused on what's next. It's actually not that much fun being a fan if you were to look and just be like, I'm just going to focus on whoever we play next, which is Watford. Now it's even less fun, right? So, like that's...
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really important point. And one of the things, if we look at, I suppose, if we delve into general kind of anxiety and stuff like that, like there's a huge amount of anxiety around in the world at the moment for lots of different reasons. And part of my understanding and the work I do around anxiety is people don't feel in control. Okay. So I can see how pundits, well, not so much pundits, fans more so, can not be anxious, but can get caught up in those narratives because they literally have no control over what happens. And I can see how Klopp would not get anxious about Mo Salah's contract situation, because what he has to control is what happens on the pitch. And he almost has an acceptance that, well, that's not part of my job. I don't need to worry about that. If Mo Salah is here in front of me, then he's part of my squad. If he's not here in front of me and he's out of the club, I still have a full squad to work with. I might prefer to have him, but it's out of my hands. And probably Mo Salah is probably similar in terms of, I could imagine he doesn't think about his contract with Liverpool at all. He just leaves it to his, or not at all, but, minor, unless he's having a conversation with his agent, who's saying, this is what I think we can get, and this is what we should do. So I'm wondering how much of the fact that they can control a certain amount of what happens, because we just want Liverpool to be okay and Liverpool to win, and we think that Mo Salah is an essential element of that, but he may or may not be. And Klopp is working with a squad who have the ability to win without Mo Salah.
Yeah, and I think the control piece is really important, because as fans, like, we have so little control. Pundits obviously have very little control too, and it ratchets up the anxiety factor, but also the reactivity factor. So sometimes, like, the emotional reactions we have are like our body attempt to, like, gain some sort of control, or to, like, like an angry tweet to FSG or whatever. Like, obviously that's wild, but, like, some part of us thinks, like, if I express my anger, like, it'll make me hurt, or I'll have done something. That action makes us feel like there's more control than in reality we have. Like, and then I think on the flip side of it too, sort of like the behind the curtain side, if we want to keep up this in front of the curtain, behind the curtain, like, there's also just a reality that sometimes these things don't work out, and that there's also a reality that sometimes you lose, or you don't accomplish what you want to accomplish. And I think that's also what allows this Liverpool group to be as grounded as it is and as centered. And I think, you're dead on when you're talking about Klopp. Like, it's not that he's indifferent about whether or not Mo Salah is present, but he's been around this long enough that he's lost important players before. Mm-hmm. And knows that this can be okay, and you move on. It's not as damaging. Sometimes you lose. And I think, like, when I work with individual athletes, sometimes, like, this is a really important milestone for people too. Is like, sometimes you don't get what you're shooting for, and sometimes you lose, and sometimes, like when we were 10 points behind in January, I don't remember exactly. I think we did a podcast sometime around then, and like, I think you asked me if I thought the league was out of reach, and I think my answer was maybe. Like, it might be, and like, I think that's such a terrible answer, first of all, but also, like, the reality to that is, I think sometimes behind the curtain, it's like you just keep winning games and you see what happens. But, like, you might lose. It might not be good enough. But, like, if you're convinced that this has to be good enough, or we need to achieve this, or, like, it makes it hard to stay grounded in the present moment. And, like, it ramps up that anxiety factor, like you said. It makes it feel like, well, I need to get this in control. And the reality of it is, like, you do your best, you put yourself out there, whether you're an individual and you're just trying to play your best game. Sometimes there's going to be mistakes, and you have to be comfortable with the fact that sometimes the outcome's not what you want. It doesn't necessarily mean you didn't play well. At the end of this season, like, we might lose. We might go to Man City and lose, and then finish 4 points behind them at the end of the year, and that would mean what? That we won pretty much every game besides that one. Like, that would be really incredible, and, like, that would suck.
Yeah.
So, like, the reality of it is, like, that there's that contradiction in there, and finding comfort in that contradiction, or just finding a comfortable space in that contradiction of, like, all we can do is play the next game and keep winning games, and at the end of the season, someone's going to count the points. Yeah, I don't know how much sense all of that made out, but, like, I think that's...
Yeah, to me, that actually... what you're describing is what I see on the pitch, in terms of the team trusts the process. The team trusts the team as individuals to do what they need to do, and they don't chase the game. That's what I've noticed. They're not chasing games. It's almost like, we know that, people talk about the plan B, and we've talked about this before, but they're so well drilled, and they trust plan A so much that they keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it, and they're winning. So that's building up the bank of evidence that, and the bank of trust that if we keep doing this process, it is going to work more times than it's not going to work. And we look at the game against Notts Forest in the FA Cup. We didn't play particularly well, but the players didn't seem to be panicking on the pitch, which is very different to what I'm seeing in the teams around us, including Man City. I watched the end of the Crystal Palace match, and they just seemed as if someone wanted to actually literally pick the ball up and just run it into the net just to give them something, So that's the big difference I see with how Liverpool are at the moment, is that the trust in the process, and with everyone else on the pitch, I know we can do this.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Well, I was going to say, it's interesting about Man City, and it's interesting. We talk a lot, or have talked a lot, about identity. Although people who are new to this might not know that. So identity is a really central part of the mental side of individual performance, knowing your skill set and knowing how to trust in that skill set and implement that skill set effectively. Is kind of where focus comes from, where confidence comes from. But at a team level too, having a good sense of team identity and team game plan and belief in that game plan and clarity around that game plan and what are we good at as a group is also where group confidence comes from. It's where sort of this idea of momentum comes from. It's that growing belief in what the group is capable of that allows you to focus more clearly on certain processes and execute those processes better, because you can kind of cancel out the noise of the doubt by focusing on the actual things you need to do. It's interesting in some ways, Manchester City has an identity that's built a lot around control. This is true of them as a soccer team and how they play on the pitch. It's true of Guardiola and how he sees the game. It's about controlling the game. And what you're pointing out is interesting, just the less control they seem to have, the nervier they seem to get, or the harder it is for them to do their thing. And when that control is pushed a little bit, it's complicated. And then you've got Klopp, who this is his whole thing, right? Being the underdog and coming from the impossible position and creating chaos for the dominant force. And so it's if you look at how these identities are sort of playing out right now, and I don't know how much there is to this, but there may be something, is that Man City, when they've won the title, they've won it big. They've done it by having control not only over each game, but they've done it often by having control over the league, whereas Liverpool, when we've made our pushes, it's really being strong in this underdog position and pushing hard from that position and kind of creating chaos from that position, but being focused on that process. And that's sort of how it's playing out, which I think probably gives us some reason for optimism.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think even after the Palace match, Guardiola was out complaining about the pitch and, stuff like that. And it just points to somebody who's maybe feeling the pressure a bit.
He hates losing. And what? Klopp hates losing too. And Klopp will complain about whatever he can find to complain about. But in fairness to them, neither of them have had to do it a lot. It's unbelievable how rarely they lose.
Mm. Yeah. We're looking at potentially two teams hitting 90 plus points again. This doesn't happen. I know it's happened quite a bit over the last few years, but in the history, in the 100 and something years of league football, hitting those kind of numbers just doesn't happen. And yet here we are looking at two teams fighting it out, punching each other to the very end. It's just unbelievable. And if we look at some of the other teams around us, and in terms of the culture, so for those of you who maybe are new to the Mindfield podcast, we do talk about culture quite a bit, and how there's been different elements or different moments over the years of Klopp building that culture that people have questioned, and we'll regularly refer back to the West Brom draw where he went down took the team down to salute the fans, and was ridiculed for it. But we were talking about the importance of that in terms of building a connection and a culture with the fans and the players, and we've seen the benefit of that over the last number of years. Even the fact that after last season we have come back as strong as we have, and we have added very few players. So I think we need to understand that it's not just FIFA or Football Manager that we're playing here. This is, the culture needs to be is at the core of what we're doing. And then we have Chelsea. What kind of culture have they got right now? Like, Jesus Christ. What a shit show.
Yeah, a little bit.
I think Klopp would be phenomenal at Chelsea right now. And I'm curious to see how Tuchel does it with the fact that, will he be able to do that? Okay, it's us against the world. But actually, can you even do that in a situation that they're in right now, given the severity of it all?
Well, yeah, I mean, like, suddenly positioning yourself as us against the world, like, you have to really be careful who us is and who the world is, and whether that's those are sides you want to be on. I think, like, you have some Chelsea supporters who chant Abramovich's name, and I think on the one hand what that means to them is maybe really different from what it sounds like to the outside, and allegiance can make you sort of blind, I think, sometimes, or that in-group us versus the world can make you pretty blind to how things are perceived on the outside. Like, I don't know, because, like, at some point, like, is this about football now? Like, and is that really what we're talking about? And if it's not really the most important thing going on with Chelsea Football Club, then that makes it complicated to be a supporter. It makes Tuchel's job very complicated. And, I think he's doing his best to try to walk that line and navigate that complicated situation, but there's a lot of questions to be asked there.
And there's been a lot of questions even before all this kicked off. They've invested exceptionally heavily in their attack, and it's quite blunt. And whether that's down to individuals or whether it's down to tactics or a combination of both, who knows? But they're definitely, and even the Lukaku interview before Christmas and stuff like that. That points to me anyway of, I don't know. There isn't a culture there of we're all in this together.
No, and I think like that. I'm trying to think, in my time watching the Premier League, if there really has been, and I think Mourinho creates that in that weird us versus them way, but not in that sustainable us versus them way. And I think Chelsea is Chelsea's different from this current Liverpool squad and this current Man City squad, and there's a lot of continuity there. And there's something that continues over time. There's a we that exists there. Whereas Chelsea never really had that. It was this group is good, and then Mourinho gets fired, and then someone else comes in, and now it's there's this kind of new group that's good, and then they get fired, and someone else comes in, and there's money spent, and now it's this group is good. And I think there was a little bit of a false dawn, to be honest, last year. And what people expected of this Chelsea group coming into this season was unrealistic, because they won the Champions League in a year where the Champions League was weird and complicated anyways. And then they bought really big, but we've talked about on here a bunch of times, buying big doesn't get you a culture, and culture and identity is what wins over the long term. And I think they don't really have that identity yet. I think Tuchel's fine. I don't know. I don't really know what they are or what they're supposed to be.
I think that's probably the problem. I would suspect that they don't know what they are or what they need to be right now as well. Because even being a player in that scenario, I'm sure internally there are conflicts, around what do we represent, or who do we represent, or hearing Abramovich's name shouted from the stands with the home fans. I'm sure it's a head fuck, But talking about, how we've discussed in the past where big money doesn't buy you success. Everton Football Club. Sorry, go on.
I was one more thing about Chelsea is I think the behind the curtain part of that, of the club being in disarray and people having a lot of instability, the behind the curtain of that I think would be really impactful on the players, because it's going to impact the staff. It's going to impact at every level. You've probably got a lot of people scrambling there with the sanctions and trying to figure out how to make this club work under these conditions. And I think that's day to day in practices, that's going to show up in different ways. Day to day in your travel, it's going to show up. And I think introducing that many question marks is just pretty exhausting for a group. And I'm sure that's taking a toll there. And I suppose that's partly the point. But it's not really meant maybe for the players there and the staff there to be feeling it in that way. But also this is, I guess, what it looks like to disrupt someone's asset really significantly. Like in some ways, like if they were playing through this successfully and winning a bunch, then it would be like, well, you're not really doing, I don't know. It's maybe not a football question.
But, you could delve into, well, what's going to happen with bonuses from sponsors and all that kind of stuff. Like it's just, there's so much wrapped up. But yeah, let's talk about Everton.
Yeah, let's do it.
Like they came in with, we're going to build this brand spanking new stadium, and we're going to get all these big players and spend huge amounts of money, and we're going to take back, and we're going to be the main club in Liverpool, our rightful seat as the main club in Liverpool again. And then I was going to say then Agent Rafa came in, but the rot's been setting in there for a few seasons now. What's your take from the outside looking in, from a psychological perspective? What do you think is going on, and what, if you were there, like even the appointment of Frank Lampard, crazy, but if you were there, what would you be looking to focus on to try and get them to turn things around?
I mean, like, always for me, it comes back to identity. Like, you can't go anywhere until you have that, because it's really hard to build any sort of confidence without something to place that confidence in. And so, it would start with really being clear about what are our strengths as a group, individually, what are our strengths. And I think you look around, like, it's not an untalented squad, but it feels like a lot of the talented players there maybe have lost some sense of what they do well. And maybe don't have a clear idea of how that plays out in the larger picture of how the team is supposed to function to win games either. And so, I think that's the first part of it, is like really getting people clear on their strengths and what they're good at and how that fits into a bigger team picture, and like how is this team supposed to win, and what does that look like. And then obviously there's everything to fight for, and they're not in a terrible position to fight for it, so like I think the other thing that becomes really hard is like there's expectations, and then there's a reality too, which is like I think it would be easy if you're down that end of the table and down that far in the table, having been expected maybe to be totally on the other side. It's easy to start feeling like, well, even if we avoid relegation, that is an embarrassing season. And that's sort of true. Like, that's embarrassing in relation to what you started hoping for and expecting. But, like, coming to terms with that reality of here's where we are. And, like, part of it is you got to get the fans on board with that reality. This is where we are. All we have is to avoid the drop. Like, so buckle up for a relegation battle. And see if you can get behind the group. And like I haven't watched enough Everton recently, except I watched them. Who did they play recently against? Maybe it was Newcastle, because they beat Newcastle, but God, did they look bad.
Yeah. I saw that game and they were not good. And
no, they looked bad. But the fans seemed like they were up for it.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Everton's fans are passionate fans, and I think the major concern I would have for them is listening to Frank Lampard coming out after matches and just literally washing his hands of any kind of influence on this and blaming the players. Like, he's only in the door, so he's doing literally the complete opposite of what you're saying to the public.
Right. Well, and that's a huge issue, right? And so, like, I haven't seen a ton of his post-game press conferences, but, I think there's a school of thought that's like, this is a way to motivate people. It's to sort of embarrass them and put the blame on them, and they need to take accountability, and that's, in that interaction of, like, punishment and accountability, like, that's what's really going to motivate people, is to prove me wrong. And I think, like, that works sometimes. Like, you can get something out of someone by being hard on them. You can get something out of yourself by being hard on yourself. Probably, we've experienced, like, different people have experienced this at different points. But at some point, like, the fuel that you're burning is your self-esteem. So if you're really low on that and you keep trying to kick yourself while you're down, you're not going to get any extra mileage. Like, you're out of gas, and now you have nothing left to stand on. And I think that's probably kind of the case with this group, is like, if you want to push someone to higher heights by bruising their ego a little bit, like, you got to make sure they have some ego left. And I don't think this group does. Like, they just don't have that strength of identity and that belief in themselves to, like, fight back against something like that. So I think it's the totally wrong approach. Maybe that's the first thing I would say is, Frank, that this is not the thing, man. This is not what you think right now.
Yeah, and we'll tip on Manchester United and then swing back around to Liverpool. So I think before the pod started, I said to you, they literally have no culture right now. It's like it's been eviscerated, in every single manner. And, my dad is a United fan. My brother is a United fan. I go to a gym where the gym owner is a passionate United fan. And oh my God, they are literally in the horrors. And I am loving every fucking minute of it. But talk to me a little bit about the lack of culture there and the impact of bringing in an interim manager. And what I thought was, actually, I didn't hear it, but somebody was saying to me that Teddy Sheringham was on Monday Night Football. And what he said was something on the lines of, like, if you were a United player and you knew Ralph wasn't around for beyond the season, why would you bother playing for him? And when I heard that, I kind of went, oh my God, that is like the most horrendous thing. If I had any players in my squad or in my club who looked at the coach and went, well, he's not here until, he's only here until May, I'm not going to bother my ass. Out the door, sharpish, quick. So what's your take?
Well, they've been keeping around players like that for a long time. Like they soccer is football, is Pogba's side hustle, right? Like, he's a fashion maven or whatever it is he does. He's a brand. Like, he is his primary job. Like, let's just call that what it is. I don't think that makes him a bad person to have around the team or a bad person. But I think it you have to have the right culture in place to handle that kind of personality and to get the best out of that kind of personality. France has been able to do that really well. Mm-hmm. Because they have bigger people there. They're not expecting Pogba to be the football leader, right? So Man United has. I mean, Cristiano Ronaldo is the same. He is absolutely like a model professional in terms of his commitment to the game, but like his brand is like, that's his most important thing. Mm-hmm. And so, like, you've introduced, I think, like a number of players who, like, they are the most important thing. Like, you've lost the figurehead of the club in Ferguson, who was really, like, keeping everyone in line with a certain identity and belief in the United way. And, I mean, the club just hasn't acted in accordance with that in a really long time. And so, where are they now? I mean, my best friend's a United fan too, and oh my God, like they're a disaster. He picked them at the start of the year. He was like, "Oh, they'll finish above Liverpool this year." It's like, what are you talking about? Like, it's unbelievable. Like what they think they are too. Like, sense of identity. Like, they don't even realize how shit they are. Like, maybe they do now, but like, I think the funniest thing about Rangnick. I think the funniest thing about that is like, right, like they brought in an interim manager, but they didn't even really, right? Like, no one, like, is he really a manager? He's just kind of there as a consultant, like, is kind of my vibe, right? So it's like, he's not really trying to put himself in place as like a figurehead in the club. It doesn't strike me as that. Like, he's just holding space until he can find someone who he says, I like this guy. And like, he benched a bunch of people and brought random people out of nowhere, like Diogo Dalot. Like, this guy was supposed to be gone, right? But I think it just shows too, like how little structure there is within that group. Like they don't know who their best players are, who their leaders are, who they're going to get a lot from on a given day. Like at least you could say that under Ollie, like they knew that, like they had more identity somewhat, but at least like Ollie's narrative was consistent. Like Bruno Fernandes was their main guy, but then they brought in a player for a bunch of money who made Bruno Fernandes worse. Mm-hmm. And so it's, yeah, like they just make decision after decision after decision that makes the waters more muddy, which is also what happened at Everton for a long time.
Yeah.
And if you look at our squad, like obviously, like we have a ton of depth right now, but like we know what our starting lineup looks like. We know what our best 13 or 14 players are, and that makes a difference. And so like maybe you have one player who I can think of in Joe Gomez, who maybe is surprised by their current situation. Like that's fair enough. But even someone like Oxlade-Chamberlain, like who's probably not getting the time he wants, like understands, like I'm just not in that group right now. And I can try to earn my way back in there, but I'm not in that group. And I think like having hierarchy with some mobility within it creates stability. And like I just think if you look over there at United and what is supposed to be this hierarchy, and like it's just really a mess. And I feel like I'm less clear on how they're supposed to play now that they've brought in someone who's like got a really clear style, except that also like that might not be the style next year. So it's like you bring someone in, normally you bring in someone with a clear style with the idea that, okay, it's going to take 2 or 3 years to implement this style, but this is sort of like, well, let's take 6 months to do something totally different so we can bring someone in to do something totally different. And in the meantime, just watch the personalities combust.
It's absolutely beautiful.
It is a little bit.
Let's pull it back around to Liverpool to kind of edge toward the end of the pod. And I think you bring up a really important point, and it's something that I think is one of either Klopp's best traits or the club's best traits in terms of managing those players who are on the periphery and not having them coming and speaking out of turn in the media.
Mm-hmm.
How does he do that? Or not how does he do it? How do players not turn around and go, what the fuck? Right, agent, get onto Twitter and start posting shit about me not getting played.
Once in a while we do see that, right? Like the post, so Naby Keita's agent came out, I think, at some point. Again, I think it was the Chelsea game at the start of this year. And then, like, but yeah, it is really uncommon. I think a few things that jump out to me. The first one is like the interpersonal parts of things. And I've seen this a bunch of times in Klopp's interviews, is like it doesn't really matter. Like he can make a really tough call about you not playing or not even being in the squad, and then interact with you the next day and interact with you in a really kind interpersonal way, and like cares about you. And like going behind the curtain, like that goes a long way with players. Like feeling cared about, matters. And as much as like a lot of people say that, well, that's garbage, that shouldn't be the thing here, it's like no, like feeling important and feeling cared about matters. And I think like there's a fine line too, and like all of these players want to play really badly. And so I think sometimes what can happen too is like care and playing time become sort of convoluted in certain ways. And so it's like, I think Klopp does a really nice job being clear of just like, yeah, these aren't the same thing. I know you want to play. I care about your playing. I see what you're good at. I notice what you're good at. Like, I don't think he's lying when he talks about how impressed he is with certain players who rarely play. Like, I think he sees what Divock Origi's potential is, but just it's not going to get him in the squad right now. And so I think that's part of how he does it too, is like it's not, playing time isn't the equivalent of care or importance. And so like when you can separate those things, it becomes really useful. And I read, it was Zlatan Ibrahimovic's autobiography, and he talked about Pep Guardiola, who obviously he doesn't care for. But one of the things in there is like basically Pep made a hard decision about benching Zlatan, and then didn't talk to him at all. And like in that book, all Zlatan really probably wanted was for him to just say, "Here's why I dropped you. Like the team's going to be better without you in it, and sorry, like here's where we are right now. You're a tremendous player, but our team is better when you're not starting." And then you weather the storm of that, like of someone being mad at you, and you take that for what it is. But that's something like in my work and some of like the more elite groups that I work with is like people get frustrated when they don't know where they stand. And people get frustrated when they're told they're standing higher, but the playing time doesn't match that. Like for the most part, a lot of I think a lot of athletes know that sometimes, like if you're not in, like you need to work hard to get your place back. But they feel like the way things are supposed to go is you're told, here's what you do, here's what you need to do to get back in the team, and if you do it, you get back in the team. But when there's a big question mark, that is when you start to get people who are really frustrated. Or, you make a lot of promises when you're brought in, and like we've heard interviews before where Klopp basically doesn't make people promises about playing time. Like with Konate, like I think he asked, like, how much am I going to play? And Klopp said, I don't know. Like, I'm not going to make that promise to you. Here's what I can promise to you. And I think that setting that expectation up front of like right there, like playing time isn't currency, and I don't owe that to you as part of your deal. You're setting expectations really clearly up front about how do we do this. And then I think when you have, of course, a group of people with a similar expectation who are interacting with each other and treating playing time in a similar way, that's when you get this cultural force too, that like a common way of reacting to that. So, I'm sure there's plenty of people at Liverpool who are upset about their playing time. I just think they probably haven't been made the kinds of promises that other people have. And I think the other thing is like you have that structure that's really in place. So like I named Naby and I named Joe Gomez as players who maybe would have cause to be more frustrated than others, and it's because they've sort of been in these starting roles before and might reasonably expect that would have been their longer term trajectory, and so it might mess with them a little bit more, frustrate them a little bit more, that's not even close to where things are at right now.
Yeah, and I think the other important piece, and I would suspect that it probably is like you said, the personable element. I could imagine Klopp has an open door policy where players it is comfortable, their relationship is comfortable enough that they can go to him and say, "Boss, I'm really disappointed with my game time," and he will sit them down and listen to them. And as with every single person that I work with, I will always talk about the importance of acknowledgement. We need to be heard as human beings. We need to know that people will notice us and see us and hear us. And I can imagine Klopp is superb at actually acknowledging the people, acknowledging their strengths, acknowledging the elements that they could work on, and also being able to say to them, you are going to get chances. It might not just be what you want, but that doesn't mean that you won't get in. So I think that piece ultimately comes down, and we've said it time and time again, for Klopp, he is dealing with humans first. He is not dealing with football players. And I think that's what makes him so special.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I think because he's very comfortable staying connected to a person while giving bad news on the business side of things or on the playing time side of things, it seems like he can say something hard to someone without that being personal. And I think that's a pretty masterful level of communication. I think a lot of people struggle to have a hard conversation with someone without it becoming an argument or like a punishment or like a criticism or like feeling personal in addition to professional, and like being mindful that this is both, like their careers are incredibly personal to them, but also like I can give you hard news and care about you at the same time. Like I can not play you and trust in how good you are. It's like a really complicated balance to hold, and I suspect a lot of coaches just can't do it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I know me and you've spoken off air in the past about how much I enjoy listening to Gary Vaynerchuk, and he recently brought out a book talking about the elements that he thinks is really important in business. But one of the things that he struggled with was candor, which is essentially, giving people bad news. And he said he realized that this is not actually helping anybody. So if I turn around to Sally in the hallway and go, "Sally, you're doing a great job," and then I'm pulling her in the next day going, "I have to let you go," he was kind of going, that doesn't work for her, it doesn't work for me, it doesn't work for the business. And he said he noticed that the businesses needed something to change, and what he did was he put kind in front of it. And he said literally that was the mindset shift that he needed, because he didn't have to be a prick about it. He didn't have to be horrible to people. He could be kind to these people and see them as people, but still deliver the news that needed to be delivered. And I think that is exactly what Klopp does, probably on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think the stability that brings to a group is really important. Just across the board, like, for lack of a better way of saying this, like, sometimes you need an adult. And, like, one of the roles of an adult, if you have, like, an adult-kid dynamic, is, like, the kid gets to throw tantrums sometimes. And obviously, like, you don't want that, like, you don't, but, like, I understand, like, when I tell my son Henry, like, no, like, it's dinner time, so we're not eating junk food or whatever, we're turning off the TV because we have to eat dinner, like, he's going to get really upset, and he's 2, so he might get, like, violently upset, and, like, my job as his parent is not to be like, okay, let's turn the TV back on, or it's not to get, like, furiously mad at him, it's to be able to, like, handle the fact that, like, yeah, he's upset because he doesn't get to watch the TV that we want, but, like, I still love him, and we're all going to eat dinner, and, like, he gets some time to be upset, but, like, he's not going to eat his dinner anyway because he's 2. But
he's going to throw it on the floor. But you're right. And you're not turning around and going, I hate that person because he's thrown a tantrum, or I'm not going to speak to him because he's upset.
Right.
You're just not, well, not yet. Wait till he's 15, then you might.
Well, he won't speak to me. But
yeah, I'm on the other end of that spectrum. So, Andrew, to wrap things up, this has been, I think, a really enjoyable chat around what we see as Liverpool's current situation and some of our opposition. Are we winning all 4?
It's possible. Maybe. I mean, but, like, I think the reality is, like, just the fact that it's possible is incredible. Mm-hmm. And, like, this team could really do it. But, like, making that prediction, like, you never know when an off day is going to pop up. You never know what bounces you're going to get on this off day. This team could do it. Yeah. And, like, that's really cool. There's going to be some coin flips in there, and you never know what way those coin flips are going to fall. But no one's ever done it before. So the stat people are going to hate me because what is it, the gambler's fallacy? But it's never been done before, so we're due, right?
I've been a Liverpool fan for just under 40 years now, and I have never, so I lived through the 80s, I've never seen a team, maybe the 87-88 team, but I've never seen a team or squad like what we have now. And we are living through a time where people will look back on as probably the greatest Liverpool squad in history, and we are so lucky to be living through it.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's incredible.
Andrew, thank you so much for your insights, and I'm not going to make any promises about when we're going to be chatting again, just in case, but hopefully sooner rather than later. And to the listeners, if you are not subscribers and you don't want adverts in the middle of your podcast, just sign up. The amount of quality content you're getting every single day is worth the few quid that it is to be a subscriber. So sign up, join the Discord, and you're going to get more fantastic awesomeness like this.
In reasonable doses.
In reasonable
that won't explode the universe.
Yeah, we don't want to push you too hard with awesomeness. All right, guys, until the next time, take care of yourselves.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at AnfieldIndex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Anfield Index and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.